Let the darkness guide you. The haunting Halloween night is approaching. Get ready to encounter the cursed souls and the night shift ghost. Hide and scare. In my town, there's a busy road called Geneva Road. It stretches through multiple cities, connecting neighborhoods and communities along its route, and has several smaller roads branching off from it. Some of these offshoots are bustling with traffic, but most are narrow, winding farm dirt roads that seem to be lost in time. These dirt paths are lined with old, overgrown fields and decaying fences, some leading to long-forgotten barns and abandoned houses. One of those roads, an especially eerie and desolate one, is where my story takes place. My buddies and I were bored one chilly autumn evening and thought it would be fun to explore all the spooky places we could before Halloween got too close, when crowds would ruin the thrill of it all. We started talking about different haunted spots that people knew about, along with places we'd heard stories about but had never visited ourselves. My friend, let's call him Jeff, then told us about a place his grandpa and his buddies used to visit, back when they were young. Supposedly, it was haunted, a lone, decrepit house out on a dirt road a few miles off Geneva Road. We were instantly intrigued and asked him why it was considered scary and what the story behind it was. Jeff told us, the only time my grandpa started to tell me about the history of the house, my grandma poked her head around the corner, shook her head at him with the sternest look I'd ever seen, and my grandpa just stopped, saying, "Never mind, you're too young." But his grandpa did end up telling him how to find the house. So, with the kind of thrill-seeking energy only a group of restless friends could have, we all climbed into our buddy's car, we'll call him Louis, and set off on our little adventure. There were 4 of us in total. Me, Jeff, Louis, and another friend, Jason. We were all brimming with excitement and nerves as we headed toward this mysterious place none of us had ever heard of before. A place that was old, decayed, and reportedly scary enough to send shivers down anyone's spine, even back when Jeff's grandpa was young. After a while, we found the road that Jeff's grandpa had mentioned. The sign marking it was something I still laugh about. I don't know if someone had put it up as a joke or if it was serious, but it looked like a classic Halloween sign, painted in red letters that read, "Beware." At the time, we laughed it off as part of the spooky setup, but now I wish we had heeded the warning. As we drove down the road, it was as if the atmosphere around us changed. The air felt heavier, colder, and soon enough, an unsettling feeling settled over the car. It was more than just fear. It felt like an ominous, sickening weight pressing down on us. The fields on both sides of the road were dead, with tangled, twisted trees appearing at intervals, their bare branches clawing at the darkening sky. And then in the distance, we finally saw it, the house. It was a lot older and creepier than I had anticipated. The peeling white paint clung to the wooden siding in patches, revealing red brick underneath, giving it an even eerier look. Most of the windows were still intact, but that just added to the unsettling feeling, as though someone or something was watching us through the glass. As we pulled up to the house, we all felt a wave of doubt and unease. But we got out of the car anyway. Slowly and cautiously, we approached the house. At one time, it must have had 4 steps leading up to the porch, but only 2 remained now, and the porch itself was visibly falling apart. We carefully climbed up the steps that were still there, feeling the wood creak under our weight. None of us dared to try the door, and Jeff was the only one brave enough to peer into one of the windows. Suddenly, a strange hush fell over us, and we all felt the urge to whisper, even though we knew there was no one around for miles. Jeff squinted through the dusty glass and murmured, "I can't see anything, it's too dark." Louis quickly offered, "I've got a flashlight in my car, I'll go get it." I think he was just looking for an excuse to get off that porch. I didn't blame him. None of us felt quite right. Louis returned with the flashlight, handing it to me before retreating to the safety of the car. That's when the truly strange things started happening. Jeff turned on the flashlight and aimed it into the window. But instead of illuminating the room, the light stopped abruptly, as if it was hitting an invisible wall only a couple of feet in. We thought the flashlight might be broken, so Jeff pulled it back, switched it off and on, and then tried again. This time, we could see a bit further into the room. There was old furniture covered in graffiti, and while it looked like no one had been there in ages, something about the shadows was unsettling. Out of the corner of your eye, the shadows seemed to move. They didn't move like objects, but more like liquid, flowing, shifting, almost alive. We couldn't figure it out, and the more we stared, the more the shadows seemed to play tricks on us. Whenever we looked directly at them, they froze, but the moment we looked away, they began to ripple and shift again. While we were fixated on this bizarre phenomenon, we suddenly heard what sounded like a piece of metal scraping along the wooden floorboards inside. We all jumped, our hearts pounding, and then Louis honked the horn. If it was possible to do a double jump like in a video game, we would have done it. The shock sent us scrambling toward the car, half because we wanted to give Louis a piece of our minds, and half because we couldn't take any more of the eerie feeling around us. But as we turned to run, a window on the second floor shattered with a loud crash. That was it. We were in the car in less than a heartbeat, tearing down the dirt road to get away from that place. We nearly forgot about Louis honking, but Jason gave him a punch in the arm, asking, "Why the hell did you do that?" Louis, still visibly shaken, just muttered, "He was staring at me from the window that shattered." Before we could ask him anything else, we noticed police lights in our rearview mirror and heard the sirens. We hadn't driven far from the house when the officer approached our car. He started to say, "You know your trespass." But his voice trailed off as he looked up at the house in the distance, then back at us, and he said, "Make sure you get home safe," faster than anyone I'd ever heard speak. He practically sprinted back to his car and drove off before we could even react. We didn't know what he saw, but we didn't want to find out. When we got home, we were all too stunned to speak. We just sat there, letting the silence settle in. Finally, Jason broke it, asking Louis, "What exactly did you see in the window?" Louis took a moment before replying, "There was a man, an old man, just standing there staring at me. I don't know how long he'd been watching. I only noticed him a second before I honked." We still don't know what Louis saw in that window or what dark secrets that old house holds. Sadly, Jeff's grandpa never got the chance to tell him the full story before he passed away. It's one of those mysteries I think better left unsaid and undisturbed. My house has always been creepy. Situated in the mountains with hills rising up on 3 sides and a steep bank sloping down on the 4th, it stands alone in eerie isolation. To one side is an abandoned volunteer fire station, closed 3 years ago due to lack of funding. Further down the street is a rusted, mysterious tractor, untouched and unmoved for the last 67 years. With such a spooky atmosphere, my home has been the preferred hangout for Halloween and horror movie nights since I was 10 years old. My friends have never been shy about sharing their fear of certain areas of the house, especially the dark, shadowy garage or the hallway that seems to stretch ominously at night. The rattling pipes and the strange airflow that makes doors randomly open and close only add to the haunted feel. As much as I'd like to say I'm immune to the chilling atmosphere, there's one thing that has always made my blood run cold. A dark figure I've caught glimpses of out of the corner of my eye since I was 5 years old. I used to tell myself it was my imagination, but as the years passed, I became less certain. This shadowy figure always lurked just out of sight, a presence I could feel even if I couldn't fully see it. I never considered the possibility of something truly supernatural until last October, just around Halloween. That night, a few friends and I decided to play a game of hide and scare, a spooky twist on hide and seek. After a few rounds of sneaking up on each other and yelling boo, we received a call from another friend who was on their way to join us. We gathered in front of the house to wait, making plans for our next moves and laughing about who had scared whom the most. As we stood there, I saw something at the top of the driveway. Backlit by the orange floodlight that stays on all night across the street, illuminating the fire station parking lot, was a dark figure. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching us. I nudged my friends, and they saw it too. We all stared, and just as I was about to say something about how strange it was for someone to be out on a mountain road at night, The headlights from my friend's car swept over the spot where the figure had been. In an instant, it was gone. When our friend parked and got out, we asked if they had seen anyone on the driveway, but they hadn't. We dismissed it as a trick of the light, an optical illusion caused by the floodlight. But there was a tension in the air that didn't go away, as though all of us knew something unexplainable had just happened, but weren't willing to say it out loud. Later that night, I was trying to find a new hiding spot near the backyard. I squeezed myself between my old dog's pen and the steep hillside, intent on sneaking up on one of my friends who was close by. Suddenly, I felt someone standing behind me. Then, two hands rested on my shoulders and pulled gently at my hair. I laughed, assuming it was one of my friends trying to scare me. But when I looked up, I saw all 5 of my friends standing on the back deck, laughing and joking, completely unaware of where I was. My amusement turned to dread as I felt the hands tighten slightly on my shoulders. My laughter died, and in its place, a scream rose in my throat. Then I heard a deep, raspy voice say something that sounded like, "Found you." I screamed as loud as I could and broke free, running towards my friends. My heart was pounding, my breaths coming in gasps. They looked alarmed, and one of them shone a flashlight in the direction I had come from. When I turned to look, nothing was there. Just the dark, empty space where I had been standing. I tried to explain what had happened, but my friends were as bewildered as I was. That ended the game, and we decided to spend the rest of the night indoors, huddled in the living room with the lights on, trying to shake off the lingering fear. After that night, I couldn't let it go. I began researching the history of the house, looking for anything that might explain what I had experienced. I discovered that the house's previous owner was a police officer who had been arrested for abusing his daughter. He died in prison under suspicious circumstances, and the daughter went missing shortly after his death. Some locals claimed she'd been seen wandering the woods around the property, while others whispered that she too might be dead. As I read these details, a chill crept over me. Could it be that the shadow I'd seen since I was a child was somehow connected to this tragic story? The thought of that voice, the gravelly, low voice saying "found you," still sends shivers down my spine. I don't know if it was him, the man who had lived here before, or if it was something else entirely. But after that night, I can't walk through my house without looking over my shoulder. Every creak, every gust of air feels ominous, as though the very house itself is alive and watching. To this day, my friends refuse to play hide and seek at my house. Halloween nights have become quieter, less thrilling. The idea of playing games in the dark now feels like tempting fate. Even when I'm alone, I sometimes feel those hands on my shoulders, that whisper in my ear, and every once in a while, out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of that dark figure, just watching, waiting, as though he's searching for someone he's lost, or perhaps waiting for someone to notice him. Back in the 90s, I worked as a paramedic in a fairly large city in the Midwest, a place where unpredictable events were the norm. I'd encountered countless situations that demanded resilience. Scenes of car accidents, stabbings, and drug overdoses haunted my days and nights. Despite all I had seen, there was one incident that stayed with me, something I still can't explain to this day. It was Halloween night, a time when the eerie and unusual felt just a bit more plausible. That evening, I worked the night shift with my partner Miguel. As usual, we were prepared for a busy night. Halloween always brought a wave of accidents and strange calls, but this call would be different. The dispatcher sent us to an apartment complex in one of the worst neighborhoods in town to respond to a report of an unresponsive man. The description was vague, but that wasn't uncommon. We were used to piecing together details on the scene. As our ambulance pulled up to the building, the street was surprisingly quiet. It was a Saturday night on Halloween, and yet there was an unusual stillness in the air. Just as we parked, we spotted a man lying face down on the sidewalk outside the complex. Miguel and I exchanged a glance, and then quickly grabbed our equipment and a stretcher before approaching him. The man looked to be in his 40s or 50s, with thick, curly hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He was dressed in jeans and a plaid shirt, and he appeared as ordinary as anyone else we'd ever treated. There were no visible signs of injury, no blood, no obvious wounds. We called out to him, but he was unresponsive. I knelt beside him, searching for signs of life. His pulse was faint, and his breathing was shallow. My instincts told me we needed to act fast. I looked around, hoping to find someone who could tell us what had happened, but the area was deserted. The stillness felt unsettling. Normally there would be bystanders, or at least a few people milling about, especially on Halloween night. As we prepared to lift the man onto the stretcher, a woman suddenly appeared at an upper window of the apartment building. She was leaning out of a fifth-story window, waving her arms frantically and shouting something in Spanish. I called her, but my limited Spanish wasn't enough to understand her. Miguel, who was fluent, came to my side and began conversing with her. Their exchange was quick, and then Miguel turned to me with a slightly puzzled expression. "She's the one who called," he said. "There's someone in the apartment on the 5th floor who needs help." I pointed to the man lying on the stretcher beside us. "What about him?" I asked, gesturing toward the sidewalk. But when I looked down, he was gone. For a split second, my mind scrambled for an explanation. The man had been there, we had checked his pulse, and we had nearly loaded him onto the stretcher. Thinking he had somehow gotten up and walked away, I scanned the area, but there was no one in sight. Even if he had managed to move on his own, there was no way he could have disappeared so quickly without a trace. Miguel and I exchanged a silent look of bewilderment. The urgency of the call from the 5th floor pulled us from our confusion, and we had no choice but to continue with the task at hand. We picked up our things and hurried up the stairs to the 5th floor apartment. Inside, we found an elderly man who had collapsed and hit his head. We stabilized him and got him to the hospital, the incident on the sidewalk slipping temporarily into the back of our minds as we focused on our patient's immediate needs. But that strange Halloween night haunted me. Days later, I couldn't shake the image of the man lying on the sidewalk, his unresponsive body, and the mysterious way he had vanished. It felt like a trick of the mind, but Miguel had seen him too. Neither of us could deny that. But that strange Halloween night haunted me. Days later, I couldn't shake the image of the man lying on the sidewalk, his unresponsive body, and the mysterious way he had vanished. It felt like a trick of the mind, but Miguel had seen him too. Neither of us could deny that. I asked her to tell me more. After a moment of hesitation, she spoke in a soft, almost reverent tone. Xavi was a neighbor of ours when I was a kid. He passed away, suddenly, about 20 years ago. It happened right there on the sidewalk. I felt a chill run through me. The timeline didn't add up. It was impossible. Xavi would have been gone long before I ever arrived on that call. But Lisa continued, her voice laced with sadness. People still see him sometimes. He's usually just there, standing on the sidewalk, like he's on his way somewhere. Sometimes he's lying there, exactly where he died. Lisa told me that other neighbors had seen him too. Some had tried to speak with him, but he would never respond. In every instance, when someone looked away or turned their head, Xavi would vanish. It was as though he were caught in a loop, revisiting the moment of his passing over and over again. Unlike those neighbors, I had felt Xavi's pulse, sensed his faint breath. To me, he had felt real, solid, as though he were alive. The thought that I had not only seen him but also touched him, interacted with him, filled me with an unease I couldn't shake. Over time, the memory of that night weighed on me more heavily. It became harder to dismiss. Every call I answered afterward came with a sense of dread. I began to question the reality of every patient I encountered, wondering if the person I was helping might simply disappear when I turned my back. The line between life and death felt thinner, less certain. I started to doubt my senses, fearing that I might encounter another Xavi, someone caught between worlds. After months of wrestling with these thoughts, I decided to leave my job. The incident with Xavi had changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. My work as a paramedic had always been about helping people, but now it felt like I was being haunted by the ones I couldn't save. Leaving was the only way I knew to regain peace, but even now, years later, I still sometimes see that man's face, and I wonder if he's still there on the sidewalk, waiting for someone to notice him again.